Welcome back to part 2 of An Apocalyptic Christmas, where we are exploring themes of empire, militarism, and money through the lens of the book of Revelation. We normally use the birth narratives contained in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke to remember Christmas, and we sometimes forget that the book of Revelation also contains a birth narrative, namely in chapter 12. Revelation's birth narrative is not a different story, but an unveiling or an apocalypse of the same story, one where Satan is empowering an empire to destroy Jesus and his followers by demanding their allegiance. In this episode, I talk with Dr. Greg Boyd about the theme of militarism and violence. While the book of Revelation is often thought of as a violent book where believers are commanded to take up arms and fight against evil, the opposite is actually true, as Greg and I point out in our conversation. I want to thank Evan Wickham again for allowing us to use songs from his latest Christmas album called Christmas Music Volume 2 throughout this series. So without further ado, please welcome back to the show, the one and only Dr. Greg Boyd. Greg Boyd, how are you this morning?
I'm doing just spiffy.
All right. Spiffy. Greg Boyd's, I feel like you're always doing spiffy. Whatever you're on, I want some of it. Is it caffeine? Is it just natural adrenaline or
yes, speed? Caffeine. Like I always have to have my caffeine.
Are you still drumming in a speed metal band?
Well, I never was in a speed metal band. I'm in an old rock and roll band.
Okay.
I like speed. I'm always trying to become a speed metal drummer just because I like the drumming is so awesome. And so I began to teach myself that about 10 years ago, and I'm still pretty bad. But it's because they're doing stuff with drums these days that when I was learning drums, I mean, we had one bass drum and it was a boom chick, boom chick. Now you have double bass and they are as fast on their feet as they are with their hands. Wow. It's just like, and I just think it's, as a drummer, I just stand in awe of it. And I want to be like that when I grow up.
Was Neil Peart the best drummer in the history of rock and roll? I mean,
arguably, you could make that case. Yeah.
Yeah. Who would be like the competitors to Neil Peart?
Well, my hero in drums was actually Buddy Rich. I grew up idolizing him, and he was he could do stuff that with one hand, hand single circles. It was just. I actually I went to see him in concert in 8th grade. My band teacher took me to see him, and I was about 10 yards away from him, and I just sat there. I was right in the front row, right next to the drums, and just staring. I was mesmerized. So,
wow, all right. Well, we're going to talk about not music. We actually have another future podcast coming up on that, but we're doing a series on an apocalyptic Christmas, and I would love for you to help us think through how the book of Revelation speaks to and in many ways disciples us in these themes of violence, militarism, maybe even just aggression as a whole. Let me just begin with the question. How should we think about the book of Revelation and violence? Let me just start 30,000-foot level, and you take it however you want.
Yeah. Well, let me first commend you on having an apocalyptic Christmas. Usually the book of Revelation and Christmas aren't usually, put together. It's have yourself a apocalyptic Christmas. Let the end times come. Well, see, I'll admit I didn't like the book of Revelation for most of my life. I first became a Christian in 1974, and we just were steeped in the book of Revelation because the late great planet Earth had just come out, and we studied it meticulously, and we had figured out who the Antichrist was and what the beast is all about, and we had it down, man. And I kind of burned out on all that. And after that, because we lived in this idea that we were sure that Jesus was going to return by 1975. I mean, it was just, I forget how we figured that out, but we had it figured out. Turns out we were wrong. But after that, I kind of steered clear of it. And then when I really began to understand, and this is like in the 90s and early 2000s, I got clearer and clearer about, Jesus' call to nonviolence, his love your enemies, turn the other cheek, don't retaliate. Paul says the same thing. The clearer I got about how central nonviolence is to the teachings and the example of Jesus, the more distance I had with the book of Revelation, because it just seems so opposite that. It just seems so violent, and I just couldn't make any sense out of it. And then I began to, I guess around 2010 or so, really began to find some authors who showed me a different way of reading Revelation. Richard Bauckham was the one, and Michael Gorman, whom you're going to have on. He has a great book on Revelation. Yeah. And really, I had not noticed the subtle ways in which John takes violent imagery. He has really some really horrendously violent imagery there. Blood up to the horse's mouth and going for 200 miles. It's just a slaughter fest. But if you pay close attention to it, he takes these violent symbols and he turns them on their head to mean the opposite. It's not. And so as I've been exploring that, and right now I'm actually preaching through the book of Revelation. We've been at it for a year and a half, and I'm up to chapter 6.
Oh gosh.
We're just going verse by verse, man. I'm just going through this book, loving it. So seeing it, the subtle ways in which John takes his violent imagery, turns it on head to mean the opposite. And it's just brilliant. It's just.
Can you give a couple examples or one example?
Yeah. The best one is in Revelation 19, which is I have read. One author said that this is the most violent chapter in the Bible, and it on the surface it seems like it's very gory. But in Revelation 19, this is the great battle of Armageddon when Jesus and all his army is going to come down and he's going to confront the beast and the prostitute, and he's going to and they have all their armies and all the kings of the earth and all their nations and all their armies, and they're all going to fight the Lamb. And so there's this big battle scene, although no battle is ever described, interestingly enough. But when Jesus shows up, he's got an army all dressed in white. They're not wearing military fatigues. They're all dressed in white, and no one's carrying any weapons, which is kind of interesting. The only weapon that's mentioned is a sword that comes out of Jesus's mouth. And so with this single sword coming out of his mouth, it says he slaughtered the kings of the earth, and it was a slaughter fest. And then John says, and the birds of the air came down and devoured their bodies. It's a really gory scene. Pulls right out of the Old Testament and some other apocalyptic works. And so there's this feast. The birds feast on their bodies. It's John's way of saying they're really, really, really dead. But what's interesting is that if you read it closely, Jesus is covered in blood. Yeah. It says he's soaked in blood. And he's pulling in some imagery out of Isaiah 63, where Yahweh returns from battle. I think it's Isaiah 63, where Yahweh returns from battle, and he's got blood splattered on him. And returning from battle with blood on you was a badge of honor in the ancient Near East, because it showed that you slaughtered them, but they didn't slaughter you. And so John pulls that scene, but Jesus is covered in blood before he goes into battle.
Right.
And what John is saying there is that this lamb, the slain little lamb, he fights not by shedding other people's blood, but by letting his own blood be shed for them. He fights with this self-sacrificial love. And the sword, well, it's a sword that comes out of his mouth, because you find this 4 times in the book of Revelation, because he speaks the truth. He speaks the word of God. And so what he's slaying here is not actual people. He's slaying these folks insofar as they're deceived. And that's a major theme throughout the book of Revelation. They're deceived by the ancient serpent. They're false identities. The truth, the one who is faithful and true, he's got a banner on it that says the word of God. He lays them low, slaughters them, but he slaughters them with truth. So this is the dynamic throughout the book of Revelation. It's about truth confronting lies and deception. And that's why these kings are really, really dead at the end of book of Revelation 19. But in chapter 21, we find them resurrected. And these kings now are bringing the glory of their nations into the heavenly city. And so in the process of being slain, slaughtered, they've been redeemed, because the truth has exorcised the lie. It's cast out the lie and the great deceiver, and freed them to now do what they were always created to do. And they actually now are in. And the kings are the bad guys throughout the book of Revelation. You know, they're always the ones that are working for Babylon and all the rest. And but now they're transformed, and they bring the glory of the nation into the heavenly city. So yeah, there's a battle, but it's a battle not of physical bodies, but of truth and lies.
That's interesting. So I didn't notice the king's aspect here. So yeah, he this is verse chapter 19, verse 17. Come, and the angel says to the birds flying, come, gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty. So that he's fighting against kings, generals, and the mighty. Slays them with truth, not with the actual sword. And you said 4 times in the book of Revelation, or every other time sword is
coming out of his mouth.
Literal. It's not a literal sword. It is the truth or word of God.
Well, if it's a literal sword, Jesus has got some real good neck muscles commanded to slaughter all the kings of the earth with both hands tied behind my back.
Maybe he's swallowing. Maybe it's a circus and he's swallowing a sword.
No, it's pointing in the other direction.
Yeah. I have a line about that. It was a bit of a comedic relief in my book on nonviolence, where I talked about this passage. I can't remember what I said, but it was something like that. Like, either this is a circus act and Jesus is a sword swallower, or there's something else going on, or something like that. So you actually you open up another can of worms. We're just gonna talk about violence, but now you're opening up some hints of universal reconciliation, I think, by talking about the potential of these kings bringing their. I don't know if you want to go there. I don't know if you were hinting at that, or if that was not your point.
That was not my intent, but we can go there. It's because you find there is a strong universalistic motif running throughout Revelation. There's all these scenes where all the people, all the nations, all the tribes, every tongue gathers around the throne, and so you have this vision of universal reconciliation. However, the book doesn't end with tying a knight's bow around it and said, and everyone lived happily ever after. The book ends with the gates of the city are open day and night. They're never closed. So there's always an invitation there, but there are still people outside the heavenly city still practicing their abominations, and they can come in whenever they want to, but they don't want to. Because nothing, you have to give up your abominations to go into the heavenly city, because nothing unclean, John says, can come into that city. God will be all in all in the end. His love's going to define every square inch of the cosmos. And so everything that's going to be in that eternal kingdom, in that heavenly city, has got to be compatible with that love and reflective of that love. And so until we're transformed into Christ likeness, we don't go in. And if we don't want to be transformed, we stay out. So the way I always, not always, in the last 10 years have put it, is that I'm a hopeful universalist. I really have hope for everybody, but I can't say I'm confident or that, hey, don't worry about anything. It's all going to come. In my view, it has to be chosen. Love has to be chosen, and until we're ready to choose that and be transformed by that, well, then God won't coerce us into His kingdom.
I do hopeful universalism. I think a lot of people, if they're honest, I think would be a hopeful universalist. And I think you and I both would agree that it's not just that we hope that that's the case or wish that was the case, but there's actually some strong exegetical evidence for it. Now, I do think the exegetical evidence in favor of annihilation is stronger. And from my vantage point, annihilation sort of cancels out universalism. But I love what you said, that the book of Revelation, I agree with this. It doesn't put a tight bow on it.
No.
The way it ends, it's just, you had this lake of fire and everything's thrown into it. And then all of a sudden you got people showing up in the next chapter and they're hanging out outside and still living in sin. And the book of Revelation, even chronologically, is just hard to, I don't know. I haven't really nailed it down. Some people have nailed it down too much, in my opinion, but I mean, it's, I think it does create these tensions Robin Perry, who is a Christian universalist or he believes in ultimate reconciliation. He's got I edited a 4 views book on hell, and he wrote the Universalist chapter. And look, unless unless you turn your brain off, you have to admit that he makes some really, really compelling exegetical arguments in there. It is a
as all died in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ.
Yep. Romans 5:18, yeah. 1 Corinthians 15. But he makes a strong case even from the book of Revelation. Basically what you said, that that every time you see the nations appear here, they're always the bad guys. So when you see the nations flooding into the new creation, those are bad guys being redeemed,
Exactly.
And the kings of the earth, which you hinted at. But I don't want to get too far into this. Hopefully there's enough worms I've opened up in this can that people can chew on over this Christmas season. Let's go back to this idea of John turning violent imagery on its head. In Revelation 19, do you remember, is he alluding back to that scene in Ezekiel 38 and 39 about Gog from the land of Magog? And I know there's some imagery there that if all we had was Ezekiel 38 and 39, we just think, yeah, this is just a violent battle. So the original context does seem violent, but how the book of Revelation is, how the author of Revelation is reading it, he's interpreted it differently than what we'd expect if he just had the original context. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep. The other thing that I'd say about the book of Revelation is that, and this is more controversial, a lot of scholars wouldn't agree with this, but all the violence that comes on the earth, when a third of the humankind is slain or whatever, that is often people assume that it's God or the Lamb that's doing all of this.
Okay.
But I'm making the case, and as I'm preaching through this series, this kind of motif I hit on all the time, that it's the powers of darkness that do all of that. When the living creature says, "Come," and then the first horseman appears, and then the second horseman appears. That "come" isn't. I don't take it as a command of God talking to his servants saying, "I want you to do this." It's rather a summons to show yourself, come forth, show your true colors, come out from hiding. So, and when they do that, and that's when there's this destruction that's brought on the earth and things like that. But I think it's demonic agency, and it's always important to remember that you're dealing with an apocalyptic book where there's everything's symbolic. If you take it literally, I don't know how it makes any kind of sense, because you have the stars falling from heaven 3 different times, and you've got all these cycles of judgment that get repeated over and over again. People, a third of the earth gets slain and the rivers turn to blood, but then later on, they seem to be all back again.
Yeah.
And a third, in Revelation 8 and 9, when the unsealing of the scroll, it says that it repeats like 13 times, a third of the trees and a third of the water and a third of humankind was destroyed, whatever. And Sigve Tonstad, in his commentary on Revelation, he argues that 1/3 is, if you look at in Revelation 12, the dragon wipes out a third of the stars from the sky, and that's, he argues, a kind of the symbolic signature of the ancient serpent. He's the 3 wannabe, the one who says, "I will ascend on high," Isaiah 14. And Isaiah 14 lies behind a lot of what's in the book of Revelation. I will ascend. So he wants to be, the 3 is the number of God, the perfect number. Okay. But he's the 3 wannabe, 1/3. And all that is to say that when you read about 1/3, don't think that God's up there measuring. Okay, we got 8 billion people, so we got to kill 2.372% of them. You got to measure, just make sure it's a third. It's a symbolic way of saying this is signed and delivered by the ancient serpent, the great deceiver. It's his signature.
Interesting.
It's symbolic.
Well, whenever we encounter a number in the book of Revelation, our assumption should not be this should be literal unless proven otherwise. It's the opposite.
Right.
This is symbolic unless we can really find a good argument to say this is actually intended to be literal. I don't know a single number in the book of Revelation that's intended to be literal. Now, people might say, well, the millennium, 144,000. I'm like, yeah, exactly. I mean, these are clearly, we're scholars, we're not supposed to say clearly, right? But I think it's kind of clear that these numbers are drawing on something really robustly symbolic. But that third, I haven't dug deep into that. That's super interesting. What about, regarding the image of blood, or the potential of blood, I guess, have you looked into Well, not potential. It does say blood in verse 20. And 14, at the end of chapter 14, where the winepress scene, that the angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city. The blood flowed out of the grapes, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia, whatever the heck that is.
It's about 200 miles, I think.
Is it? Okay, wow, there you go. Most people take this as a wrath judgment scene. I'm gonna guess you don't, but I don't. Actually, I don't think I did in my book on violence. I should go back and check because I did remember. I think N.T. Wright does not, and a couple. It's a minority view, but some people still don't take the blood as the blood squirting out from the people being trampled. That's not what is intended. Now again, I think that is a minority view. It might be a little more difficult if you just read it at face value. But how do you understand this passage?
Yeah,
Or have you not gotten to it yet?
Wrestled with that a couple of years ago, and now I'm trying to remember how it's been a while since I looked at that.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that it was something like, it was another thing where John does this funky move. Isn't it the martyrs that are being trampled on?
That's the view that is the view I took, that it is the it's not God trampling his enemies, it's the martyrs.
Yeah. And that they were picked they were picked just because they were ripe. So it's a kind of a first fruits imagery, and so it's about martyrdom. It's about these folks who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. It says in Revelation 14, and they do what the Lamb did, and what the Lamb did was lay down his life, right. And so they follow his way. But I don't recall the details of it, and I probably should shut up.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's theology in a raw. We can
be raw.
We can be raw and just say, hey, I know I've dealt with this elsewhere. I think I took this interpretation. Please go fact check my own. I mean, I don't know how. No, but that, I mean, if you take grape imagery, that's usually positive. Usually enemies are not described. I don't think in Old Testament imagery that the harvesting of the grapes that would be used to apply to enemies. Usually that would be a very positive thing.
Right,
fruitfulness of the vine. And also, like you said in the book of Revelation, you do have this idea that, well, he in is it chapter 6 when he says, when they're crying out, how long, O Lord, until our blood is redeemed or whatever, and he says, hang on a little more until the full number comes in, meaning there's going to be more martyrs that are going to come in, and that is almost framed as a good thing. Well, it is framed because Jesus was the ultimate martyr. As you said, you follow Jesus wherever he goes, and in the book of Revelation, you have this upside down idea that being killed by the Empire is way more powerful to fight the dragon than trying to kill the dragon. So
yeah, and that's why the other thing you have going on in Revelation is you have two perspectives. There's the perspective of the heavenly throne room, which is the perspective of truth, and then there's the perspective of the earth, which is under the deception of the great deceiver. And so, from the perspective of the folks on the earth under deception, they say, "Oh, the beast defeated them in Revelation 13." And
right.
It looks like they won because they got killed. The Christians were killed, and so it looks like the beast was victorious. But turns out that in the process of getting killed, that was their victory. So from the perspective of the throne room, they're cheering this on, because you were faithful. You did not, as it says in Revelation 12, they didn't love their lives, but rather follow the Lamb wherever he went. And they overcame by the word of the testimony and by the blood of the Lamb. And Richard Bachman argues that when you have that idea of they overcame by the blood of the Lamb, it's not talking about atonement theory. It's talking about the way of the Lamb, the shedding, this other-oriented, self-sacrificial love that would rather lay down its life for the sake of the other rather than to kill. And so these don't participate in the violence that characterizes Babylon. The horse that goes forth to conquer with the intent to conquer. It's endless conquering, endless more. Got to get, and really it describes this, that I will ascend mindset is the Lucifer mindset. I will ascend on high. I will be like God. I will be, I will go to the mountaintops. Isaiah 14, 12 through 15 says. And that's the same lie that the serpent gives to Eve. You can ascend. You can be more. Transgress the boundary. God's trying to box you in. Transgress those boundaries. Eat of that fruit. And so they get infected with this I will ascend mindset. And that's kind of the affliction of humanity. It's why we're turning this world into a war zone, because everyone's trying to ascend. And when everyone's trying to play king of the hill, well, you're going to have a lot of conflict. The lamb, the way of the lamb is the way of descent. Because we follow Philippians 2 says this, where Jesus, he emptied himself. He divested himself. Though he was equal with God, he didn't grasp onto equality with God as something to be clung to, but he released it, and he became a humble servant, and then he was obedient to the death on the cross. And so he's coming under us to lift us up. That's what love does. He's sacrificing on our behalf in order to reconcile us to the Father. And so you have the way of ascent versus the way of descent. And the way of ascent always involves violence, because you're trying to get your way. You're trying to climb up. Right. The way of descent disavows violence, and we model our life after Christ.
That's good. Oh, it's so good. You see that everyone in Revelation. One of the images that I love so much, that is another one of these examples that the way you described it, like turning violent or military image on its head, is just the word nikao, which is often translated conquer, or there's other English translations that might be used, but the lamb has conquered, and nikao it's a military term. It's where we get Nike, the god of something, god of, what is Nike? I don't know. Somebody can Google it. It has something to do with conquering or military. Or
I used to know, and I'm finding that you hit a certain age and you forget more than you ever learned.
Man.
It's just
man.
But maybe it's the god of war. I don't know.
So, yeah.
But you're absolutely right, and that's a cornerstone of the book of Revelation. It's another example of how John turns things on its head. It starts in Revelation 5 when they were asking who's worthy to open the scroll, and the scroll I take to be just the scroll of truth, the scroll of who God really is and what God's up to in this world and how God will defeat evil. Now it's going to be revealed. It's been concealed because we were deceived. We bought the I will ascend lie, and when you buy that, you can't correctly understand who God is. But now he's going to reveal it. So who's worthy to open the scroll? And John hears someone say, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Mm-hmm. And that is a military kind of messianic concept. This lion that can rip its enemies to pieces, and it's real triumphalistic, whatever. But then John, so he hears a Lion of the tribe of Judah. But when he turns and looks, he sees a slain little lamb. And that's a thing that John does a lot. He hears one thing, but then he turns and he sees something else. Right. And what he sees reinterprets what he heard.
Yes.
So, there's this mighty lion, but actually the lion turns out to be the slain lamb. And so John's saying with this composite picture that, God fights and he's aggressive and he roars, but he does it by laying down his life, by giving his life for others. So it just completely turns it on its head.
That's that Richard Bauckham. I think he was the first. I think he was the original one to really point that out. So a lot of people.
That's where I got it.
Yeah, but I think everybody is like, oh yes, this makes total sense. That when John hears something, it's interpreted by what he ends up seeing. We had this, this. So he sees this powerful lion, and that doesn't mean, oh no, Jesus isn't a powerful lion. He's a slaughtered lamb. It's like, no, the means by which he conquers as a lion is by laying down his life.
Right.
So this idea of laying down your life, and as you put it, descending and serving and sacrificing yourself, and maybe even being a martyr, like that's not defeat. That's actually true power in God's world.
Though it looks like defeat from the world's perspective.
Yes.
From a natural point of view, the cross is weakness and foolishness. But to those who are being saved, it is the power and the wisdom of God. 1 Corinthians 1. And that statement, I think, is just so incredible because, in the history of religion, no one said anything that crazy. That God's omnipotence looks like Jesus getting crucified. We have a whole history of to determine, what do human beings do when we make up our gods? Well, what we do is we project ourselves onto the screen of heaven and call it God. And so the kind of power we've always ascribed to the gods are the kind of power that we are always lusting after. The power to conquer, the power to get our way, the power to ascend. And so the gods become simply a blown up version of ourselves. And then the way religion works is we try to make a deal with that powerful God so that he'll use his extra power on our behalf. We'll sacrifice our firstborn son. In return, he'll help us defeat our enemies. And that's kind of been the role of religion, at least much religion, throughout all of history. But here comes Paul, and he says the opposite. And John says the opposite. The real power is in the slain lamb, this slaughtered little lamb. It's too crazy by the world standards and too beautiful for humans to make that up. That's why I got to believe it's divinely inspired.
Okay, so I absolutely love to eat. I think about food all the time. It's kind of a problem, okay? But while I try to eat healthy most of the time, I definitely don't eat healthy all the time. This is why I need to take a nutrition supplement. And I've tried many different kinds of supplements, but I found AG1 is the absolute best for me. AG1 is like a nutrition blast to the body. It's packed with essential vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, adaptogens, and more. And when you drink it consistently, you will experience more sustained energy, mental clarity, and it supports your immune health. Now, here's the thing. I was drinking AG1 for nearly a year before they started sponsoring the podcast. So I don't promote AG1 because they're paying me to. I promote AG1 because I can personally feel the difference when I'm drinking it every day. And here's the thing. We're coming up on a new year. So what better time to make some healthy changes in your life? So this new year, try AG1 for yourself. It's a perfect time to start a new healthy habit. And that's why I've been partnering with AG1 for so long. And right now, AG1 is offering new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of vitamin D3K2, and 5 free travel packs in your first box. And those travel packs, I use those all the time. So I travel a lot. I'm constantly throwing travel packs in my suitcase. So make sure you check out drinkag1.com/TITR to get this offer. Okay, so that's drinkag1.com/TITR to start your new year out on a healthier note.
In the last days, he will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end.
Okay, so here's where the rubber meets the road. As a pastor, how long have you been pastoring for now? 30 years? 20 years?
We started Woodland Hills 33 years ago.
Oh, man. How do you instill that upside down view of power in the people you're shepherding? Because I mean, we're both agreeing with each other here on this really important theme. So we're there mentally. I find it hard. I find I have to like preach this to myself every single day because at any moment, I can encounter something during the day. It's a jerky neighbor. It's somebody cut me off. It's anything. I just walk out my door or stay inside my house because I got people living in my house. And the temptation to overcome adversity with power it's just so deep in my bones.
Well,
and I believe this stuff. How do you do it with a congregation of 1,000 or so people or whatever, a couple thousand that they may not even believe it yet, or they're not their nose isn't in a text every day for 30 years, with this theme. Like, how do you do this as a pastor?
Well, that is, you keep coming back to it. You keep trying to come, and you try to model it. And you pray.
Yeah.
And some get it and some don't. I just recently had a guy who's been at my church for almost from the start, and I know him as a guy who, a lot of things just don't go through. It's always kind of amazed me. Like, have you been listening to anything I'm saying? But he revealed to me that he carries a gun to church with him. He's packing when he comes to church, because if there's an intruder, then he wants to be the one to save the day.
Yeah.
And I said to him that if you ever killed someone, because they were going to shoot me, he was trying to protect me, because if I'm the target here. And I said, if you killed a person to save my life, I would be so pissed off at you. I really don't you ever do that. Plus, there's all these studies that show that when you bring a gun into the situation, more often than not, it backfires. You do more damage than not, and so they don't make us safer. And once in a while, you have a person who heroically takes out the bad guy with a gun, but what you don't hear as much about is all the folks. We had a person a couple of years ago here in St. Paul who kid broke into the house and it was going to steal some electronic equipment. The father comes down and the husband comes down and sees the kid, and he's got a gun. Well, the kid immediately goes for the gun. They have a tussle and they're wrestling around. The wife comes downstairs to check out what's happening. The gun goes off. Boom, she's dead. I think the guy would have rather have let the kid stolen his TV or whatever he was stealing than to have his wife dead. But yeah, so that's one of the myths that we have, is that more guns will make us safe. We should arm all the teachers. Well, then we'd be safe. We should, and it doesn't work. It just turns it into the wild, wild west, which is kind of what we have going on in America right now anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that's the effective piece. I think I agree. And I think there's a large FBI study done on active shooters, and how they stopped with a good guy with a gun, or I think they even said like through an unarmed person or more non-violently. I don't know if they use that exact term, but and again, I have to go back and double check, but the statistics were at least very complicated, if not they were most likely to be stopped by somebody without a gun. You bring a gun in a situation, and
because the active shooter is they have the upper hand, because they're probably going to be more trained on using this gun, and they've been thinking of it ahead of time. Whereas my friend here, who's just packing, bringing it to church, bringing a gun to a pacifist church. What's wrong with this picture? But he's not going to be as he's told me he's had some training, but the odds in a chaotic situation, what are the odds? I mean, you could hit a bystander with it. You could all sorts of things. We actually just wrote our policy about how to respond to an active shooter. And the way I phrased it was in this policy statement is that if someone is to come in, we have these steps you go through. First try to flee, second, But if worst comes to worst and you're cornered, well, then act aggressively, do everything within your power to stop the shooter, treating them as though they were one of your own, like a loved one. So if my son were to go insane and break into my house and want to kill me and my wife, I will do everything possible to stop him from doing that, but I'm not going to kill him. And so I use that as kind of the criteria, because we're supposed to love our enemies. So if you really love this person as though they were your own child, well, you still will do everything you can to stop them from harming others, whatever. But fatally killing them, that's not an option.
That's interesting. If you put it like, this is my son who went crazy, because somebody's son.
Exactly.
So it's somebody bears God's image. I mean, wow.
Someone for whom Jesus died.
Yeah. Wow. All right, going back to I would love to keep teasing out this intersection between non-violence in the Book of Revelation, this upside down nature of confronting evil, and pastoral boots on the ground. What are some maybe some general tendencies you see very common that come up in as you're trying to shepherd, disciple your people What are some things with regard to militarism and violence that you find yourself having to address pretty often?
Well, we're just steeped in a culture that has normalized violence. We're getting used to school shootings. Oh, another school shooting. But that first started happening with Columbine. We were all shocked and aghast. And, oh my gosh! And now it's kind of like a regular thing. We get so acclimated to it, and so our common sense is adjusted to violence. And so the call to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, and to never retaliate but turn the other cheek, and all of that. It's so counterintuitive that for a lot of folks, they can hear it and maybe on some level they'll accept it, but they have a hard time like conforming their life to that. And that's like the major thing you confront. It's like that just doesn't make sense. The guy who brought a gun to our church, it's like, yes, we're supposed to love our enemies, but you got to also be practical. Common sense. And I think actually, because of the dangers that accompany bringing a gun to church and carrying a gun all around, whatever, that it is practical to be nonviolent. But it doesn't seem so when you're swimming in water that is just saturated with violence and normalizes it. And so it's just assumed that, of course, you would kill if you had to, because we assume it's better to kill than it is to be killed. But to follow the Lamb, I think, is the opposite. I really come to the point where I believe that to follow Jesus, I have to be willing to say, I would rather die than kill. I don't want to live in a world where I got to kill to stay alive. And so you don't cling to your life, because this is a prelude to the real show, anyways. Don't get too fixed on this prelude. We're just getting warmed up. The good show's coming, and so don't cling to it. Yeah. That self-preservation instinct is just so deep. It's part of our animal nature, and that's what we have to die to. Paul says, "I die daily," and you said every day you got to remind yourself that the way of the Lamb is the way of descent, not ascent, and that's being transformed by the renewal of your mind. That's how we grow in Christ likeness, to put off all that. But common sense is the thing that we're most against, and that's where we need to just remember that the cross looks weak and foolish. It does look weak and foolish. You have to be an idiot to allow someone to kill you rather than killing them.
Right,
and that is the way of the Lamb.
So it's almost like, pastorally, you're probably sympathetic with somebody that's just using their common sense. It's like, hey, I get it. That's our natural default. And then you throw common sense into a national identity that's profoundly militaristic and has a very unique gun culture and individualism and my rights. And of course you're going to be swimming uphill.
Preston, that's the sad dimension of church history, which is a major dimension of church history, is all the ways in which the church has sanctioned violence, because it just made sense to do that. So in the first 3 centuries, the church held to this abstain from violence position. It was pacifistic. Some would argue in some sections it wasn't by the 2nd, 3rd century, but in any case, things fundamentally changed once the church inherits all that power from Constantine in the 4th century. And now the church has got to help run the Roman Empire. And you can't run an empire unless you're willing to use violence to protect the borders and violence to keep law and order inside. And so we find ways of justifying it because it makes sense to do so. Because, hey, we're better than to have, since Christians should run the empire because we're God's people. And then we're going to conquer the world in Jesus' name. And all that does is, it just guts the whole gospel. Christianity becomes, Christians become sort of the high priest of the empire. We bless our troops so that we fight for God and country, and all the rest get caught up in that. And that is not the way of the Lamb. That is the way of Babylon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, would you say when you preach like this and you talk like this in the pulpit, are most people amening and in agreement, or do you find that your congregation, even Greg Boyd's congregation, it's Jesus' congregation, but the church that you've been entrusted to help lead, do you find that there is still people that are pretty militaristic? And when you talk about nonviolence, like, this is the part about Greg I don't really like, but I'll go here anyway. Or have you kind of persuaded most of your people about this?
I think what happens is folks that don't like that message end up leaving. And so we're always, kind of thinning out. People, I've had people come there. I love the church. I can't, this is great, but you can't be serious when you say, and for some that's just a deal breaker.
Okay.
But we don't have, any Christian nationalists in my congregation, I'm quite sure, or if they are, they sure are keeping under hiding. But I come back to this message so often because I really do think Martin Hengel said that the love your enemies was like the most signature thing that Jesus taught. It's like it's his most distinctive thing. You don't find too many parallels to that in the ancient world or even in the modern world. And so I come back to this a lot. I think that this, if you can tame that animal self-preservationist instinct, I mean, that's what discipleship is, and so holding that up all the time is sort of what we aspire to, the way of the Lamb, the way of descent, the way of humility. Either people are going to be getting it or they revolt against it and leave. It's not a popular message in America. It really is not. But so what?
and I mean, was it like 20 years ago when you really got on board with this vision of reading the scriptures and you started preaching on it, and a lot of people left your church? Wasn't there like a specific time in Woodland Hills when
the Great Exodus, we call it.
The Great Exodus.
It was a series called The Cross and the Sword. I think it started in 2004. And it was a 6-week series. It became my book, The Myth of a Christian Nation. But I just, I was receiving so unprecedented amount of pressure from people to steer my flock in the right direction as it comes to voting. Who you're going to vote for, and the right-wing Christian machine was really working overtime on radio, television, whatever, telling people, tell your pastor to make sure that they, so much hangs in the balance on this election. We want the godly candidate to win. And so I just took it as an opportunity to lay out why we are not going to endorse candidates, why we don't have a flag in the church, why we don't celebrate Veterans Day, and, all the rest. And just to make it clear. We lost about a third of our congregation.
That 2004, that was back when most people still believed all the lies about the Iraq War. That was, I think that was still, or I forget when all that came out. Like,
I'm not sure how it relates with the events were surrounding it, but there was, and it's only gotten worse now. I mean, I
really, so that was my question. I want to know, like, in the last 20 years, have you seen it get better or worse? That's a big question.
In the last 10 years, it's just gotten so much worse. It's this last election, what I think it reveals, Preston, is that we have got our population is divided in two, and we don't just disagree, but we're living in different realities. With a different set of facts. And this is thanks to the internet. Everyone can kind of go down their own little echo chamber, and so we talk amongst ourselves how bad those other people are, and they're talking about how bad those other people are.
And they're reading completely different narratives and news outlets, and
and the farther we get, the less we can understand one another, the less we can work together, the more we just hate each other. And then what happens if you let yourself get solidified in these positions is that not only do you not understand how the other folks are putting it together, they're just evil, right? But you don't even want to understand. I just recently I was having a discussion with some friends, and I got pounced on because they were saying Trump is an existential threat to our country, and we have to stop him. And I was saying, he may be an existential threat, but the greater existential threat, in my opinion, is your attitude. Because this idea that we have to win, it's that I will ascend. We must ascend. We must beat them. It's not like we have to learn from them or dialogue with them. So I was saying that we ought to be trying to bridge this gap, having dialogue, learning how to talk to one another, regaining some civility. And if the church could model that to the culture, whoa, what a testimony that would be.
Yeah.
Man, they're saying you don't negotiate with terrorists. You don't try to get on the inside of the head of a person who's a serial sexual assault, person and whatever. And the alternative is civil war, which is kind of the direction that we're heading right now. So we've done a lot at our church about workshops, and we had a whole series on politics leading up to the election about the need to dialogue and to be civil. Let everything you do be done in love. 1 Corinthians 16:14. And that would include having very difficult political discussions. Can you do it in love in a way that you're agreeing with God that the person that you're talking to has got unsurpassable worth, as is evidenced by the fact that Jesus died for him, paid an unsurpassable price for them. Can you reflect that in the way that you're talking? Now, you can still have your political opinions and feel passionate about it, but make your case in a loving way. And see, that's the only way you ever change anyone. You see, that the only way arguing is that tends to solidify people in their positions. They double down. Whereas if you can dialogue and you can be in relationship, who knows, you might influence them or they might influence you. But that's how people change. It's not through hollering and all the rest.
Oh man, I don't envy your. that is.
I love it. I was built. I mean, I'm wired to. Having a minority opinion has never bothered me, and taking shots, it's never bothered me. When I was younger, I think it bothered me some, but now I really don't care.
What you're saying is so obviously biblical. I mean, it's like, you don't need to second guess your approach at all. Yeah, the people that, I mean, but even on a pragmatic level, like the both, and this is what I love about my political position, is I'm so far removed from investing in the system. And I think there's two sides of Babylon. One's blue, one's red. And so I can kind of watch from the stands in a sense, and people say, "Oh, you're checking out society." No, I am profoundly political. It's called saying Jesus is Lord and being a member in his global kingdom. That is the most political thing I could ever say.
Yeah.
And that fuels me to engage society and want to embody grace and truth in the world towards my neighbor and my enemy. So I am more political than your flag waving whichever side person. So that's not what I mean by on the stands. I mean, I am removing myself from Babylon's silly little power game that they call politics. I'm like, no, real political position starts with saying Jesus is Lord. Anyway, looking off of it, this is go ahead.
Something's political if it affects the polis, which is the
100%.
And following the Lamb affects the polis. We're supposed to be affecting the polis, so we're political. But your metaphor about standing in the stands is, I think, brilliant, because our identity is in Christ, and we're ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah,
an ambassador to a land. You don't get that immersed in the affairs of the land. Your job is to represent the interest of the kingdom that you're an ambassador of. Right. And so our primary job is to put on display the character of who God is and what God's done to redeem the world and all the rest. That's our primary objective. So we shouldn't be, we're in a country where they ask your opinion and you get to vote. Yay, wonderful. Have your opinion, but we shouldn't be identifying with that.
Right. Absolutely.
And that ought to give us be able to step out and not get in an echo chamber and to have a more objective assessment of things if you're seeing it from kind of a third party perspective with a different identity.
I think that echo chamber, people that are so appalled that anybody could possibly vote for that candidate, and you see it on both sides. I'm like, okay, let's just stop there. Let's just linger there for a second. I would encourage you to go hang out with real embodied humans that have kids, grandkids, that did vote for that candidate you think is either a communist or a fascist, whatever. Go get to spend a month offline outside of your echo chamber and in the lives of real people, and then come back and let's talk. You will see that all the reasons you think they voted, how could you do? Oh, they must be a sexist, racist, they must be a communist, they must be woke, all this stuff. No. They're just not in the same echo chamber you are. They're not spoon-fed this like warped view, this narrative, and that you've bought into, and they're doing the same thing. So if you're really shocked by this election, I think it means that you're in a bubble. You're in an information bubble. Yeah.
And each side accuses the other side of being in the information bubble. But, when you're talking about over half the country voted for Trump, if you're the minority position, I don't think you can say, oh, we have the objective truth. They're in an information bubble.
Right,
We all got to be careful that we don't get caught up in those echo chambers and get sucked into all that, kind of venom that's going on there.
Especially since more people of color, women, and younger people voted for Trump than they have in the last 10, 15 years on that side. That at least should raise some questions,
Yeah, that did surprise me, which tells me that I must have been in a bubble. Because I was a little surprised by that. There's let me put a plug in here. For folks who want to, see if they're polarized, there's a guy at my church who had started. His name's Bill Doherty. He's a remarkable man, and he and this other guy started this organization in 2016 called Braver Angels, and they started because they saw kind of how our country is just going farther and farther and farther apart. And so what they do is they host debates, discussions, and where they have a blue and a red come together, and they talk about all these really difficult topics, and you can get videos of these debates on the website, braverangels.org. And it's really helpful to watch that, because what you'll see is that you have represented the best of the other side. Instead of looking at the worst of the other side, the ones who are the extremes and whatever, you see intelligent, smart people defending positions that you thought were absolutely, indefensible. And maybe you won't come to agree with them, but at least you can understand how somebody could hold that position. And so it's very helpful to do that. Having a friend across the aisle is even better, because you be in dialogue, and in a person is always better. But this is the next best thing. So Republicans, if you don't have any Democratic friends, and Democrats, if you don't have any Republican friends, check out Braver Angels.
That's fantastic. Hey, we got a question here from my Patreon community here. This comes from Eric. He wants to know, this is another pastoral question. You're going to love this question, Greg. In light of cross vision and crucifixion of the warrior God, how would you summarize God's wrath, God's judgment, and hell to someone who struggles with that aspect of the scriptures? Now, this is right. This is
well, is it specifically with what I basically say is this, that I take God's wrath to be what happens when God lets us go. God is always trying to hold on to us and draw us closer to Him and whatnot. But if we get obstinate and if God sees that His grace towards us is simply enabling us in our sin, then He has no choice but to let us go and to experience the consequences of our decision. Romans 1 is the classic case of this, where Paul says this: now the wrath of God's been revealed. Here's what it looks like. And then he talks about how these people who they knew God, but they chose to worship the creature more than the creator, and so on and so on. So God gave them over. It says God 3 times he says that, verse 24, 26, and 27, I believe. God gave them over. And then they begin to experience the consequences of that. That's the judgment of God. You want to go that way? Well, I've tried to hang on to you, but I have to let you go, because it's very much like, if you've ever had a loved one who becomes a serious alcoholic or drug addict or whatever, you try to, help them and save them from themselves, and you pick them up from the bar, and whatever you do to keep them from experiencing the destructive consequences of what they're doing. There can come a time where you realize that you're just enabling them. And sometimes love has got to be tough. Where you say, I love you, but if this is how you want to go, I'll let you go that way, but it's going to be terrible. And then they keep, hitting bottom and redefining where bottom is. But you pray that at some point they'll get it and they'll wake up and they'll turn around. I think that's very much the case with God. We're addicted to sin, and God's trying to wean us off of it. But there can come a point where God says, if you're not going to learn it the easy way by following my ways, you'll have to learn it the hard way. And that is the wrath of God. I'd also add that I throughout the Bible, you find that when God brings a judgment, the ultimate, it's never just to get even. He was saying, is it Isaiah, where he says God strikes Egypt, but He strikes to heal. There's always a redemptive motive in this. That's why the kings of the earth in Revelation 19, they're judged the truth slaughters them, but it slaughters them for the purpose of freeing them. Or the metaphor that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians is that we're refined by fire. We all go through the fire, which I take as it's the real us coming into the presence of the real God. And that love of God burns away everything that's inconsistent with it. He talks about how the fire purifies gold, silver, and precious stone, and it burns away wood, hay, and stubble. So whatever is not compatible with God in our life gets burned away, and whatever is gets refined and perfected so that we can now enter the eternal kingdom. I forget the point I was making with that, but I think it was profound.
No. It's about God's wrath being handing them over. Well, I guess, and this is I know we're getting close to time here, but there is there are other maybe even many other passages where God does seem to have actual more agency in the judgment. 2 Corinthians 1, I think I need to go back and read it. And there's I think many others. And this was the biggest hurdle, right? In your work, trying to separate God's agency from final judgment. Is that an overreading of what you're trying to do? Or
I would. The only thing I'm really concerned with is I want to separate God from the violent aspects of any judgment we come under.
The violent aspects.
It's not God up there pounding us, but I think God still is going to be active, orchestrating things. Terence Freidheim argues this in his book on the Old Testament, where he argues that the perspective is that God turns people over to their judgments, but he's also working to ensure that takes place.
Okay.
So it's not
there is some agency. Okay.
Yeah. But I just don't.
Yeah.
Whatever's compatible with love, God does. I don't think that violence is.
Okay. Well, Greg, do you have any Christmas wishes to our audience in this Christmas season? Any pastoral challenges or encouragement along the lines of our apocalyptic Christmas, which we've been teasing out here?
Have yourself an apocalyptic Christmas. No, I guess what I'd say is, as we go into the season, it's just kind of ironic that the Christmas season is the most carnal season of the year here in America. And it's commercialism, consumerism, and all the rest on steroids. And I really encourage people to celebrate Jesus' birth in a Jesus kind of a way. And so think about how much do you really need for you and yourself, and how much maybe can you spend giving it to others who are in need. Display generosity during the season. And display kindness in the season. We just need kindness. Our world, our country, and to some degree the whole world is getting so mean. It's just getting mean and nasty. And the news and the rhetoric is getting so. Violence isn't just what we do with our physical bodies. It's anything that violates another person. That's how I would define it. And our words can be violent. Our attitudes can be violent. And but the darker the world gets, the more the church has an opportunity to offer the alternative. And so this Christmas, be offering the alternative by how you live and by how you spend your money and by how you spend your time. And be open to the Lord leading you to become maybe more generous than you were before. Maybe the kids don't need 17 Pretlins. Maybe they can get by with 3, and then you can take the others to kids in homeless shelters or whatever, however the Lord leads. Celebrate Christmas in a Jesus kind of way.
Love it, Greg. Thank you so much for your ministry, your writing, and just for being a fun hang here on Theology and Raw.
You too, back at you. You're a fun hang.
I forgot to mention, you are going to be at Exiles in Babylon this year, April 3rd to 5th, giving a kind of more of what we've been talking about, a political reading of the book of Revelation. So would encourage people to check that out. Thanks again.
Here's the final word is, the final word. There's never a final word. But, Babylon is the symbol of empire. And you'll be talking about that, I think, in subsequent podcasts. But we are in Babylon. This is Babylon. We're in the empire. And it's just that we are so used to it. Fish don't notice the water they swim in, that we don't even notice how this whole culture is built on this I will ascend mindset and conquer, and more and more and more insatiable. That's the nature of the deceiver. It's insatiable. What God has given me is not enough. I must ascend. And it's everywhere. And when you wake up to it, well, first of all, we have to wake up to it if we're going to get out of it. And to follow the Lamb is to leave Babylon. But waking up is sometimes the hardest part. And even after you wake up a little bit, it's easy to fall asleep again. Be aware that you're in Babylon.
Yeah.
And the ways of Babylon are contrary to the ways of the Lamb. And so we're supposed to be moving in the exact opposite direction of this, our culture's we will ascend on high mindset.
So good. So good, Greg. Thanks so much for being a guest yet again on Theology Raw. Appreciate you, brother.
No place for me but a stable. My Lord has come. My Lord has come. My Lord has come.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.
Hey friends, if Theology Raw has blessed or challenged you in any way, would you consider supporting the show through Patreon at patreon.com/theology in the raw? We are actually revamping our bonus material that Patreon supporters get. So we are going to 2 bonus Q&As per month for all the different paid levels. Silver level gets access to ask questions for the Q&A episode. And also you will get access to Exiles in Babylon archived content, which will be releasing different videos every month. Also access to bonus research episodes that I'm gonna record from time to time. Access to rough drafts of certain things I'm working on, which is a little scary for me to let people look into that because it's a rough draft. Gold and Gold Plus members get we have monthly Zoom chats and all the other perks that the other tiers get access to as well. So again, if you want to support the show, it really, really does help us to flourish as a ministry. Again, patreon.com/theology in the raw. I will see you in the community.